Undoubtedly, Africa is the best tourism destination on Earth. The continent is blessed with the most conducive atmosphere. To feel and enjoy these blessings, join the most productive one-week tour of the continent organized by Daylight Africa every September 2nd to September 9th to see beyond the fallacies about Africa on the mainstream media. Contact us at daylightafrica@gmail.com or call 718-822-5555. Daylight Africa. Revolutionizing tourism industries in Africa.
Hello, Scott.
Hey,
hello. How are you?
We're fine.
We're good. Welcome back to
everybody to Foreign Policy Review. What is it? Thursday, June 22nd, I believe. We are fortunate to have with us expert friend of the show, Scott Ritter. What more can we say about Scott Ritter? We don't want to spend 10 minutes going through his bio. We want to get right to it, but everybody knows him. We're very thankful and fortunate that he's coming on our program. So much to discuss. We want to discuss, the failed counteroffensive, the upcoming summit in Vilnius. I don't even know if I said that correctly. But where should we? What should our first question to Scott be? Ben and Carlo.
I would launch off with the famed counteroffensive, which really should be called an offensive because that is the right word for it. It is now the the 18th day, almost 3 weeks of a counteroffensive. We have numbers from Vladimir Putin. According to him, 245 tanks, 687 armored vehicles have been just burned. We've seen images of Bradleys, of the Leopards, of even the Iris-T air defense system burning with zero gains. They haven't even reached the first layer of Russia's famed layered defense. What I can't find is numbers. We've recently known that 75,000 people, that was the cost of the Bakhmut meat grinder, the first design of General Surovikin or General Armageddon. I'm wondering if Scott knows what is his take on the offensive, and does he know about any casualties? It's being kept very quiet right now.
Well, I'll start with the casualty figures. Today, I was in a conversation with a Russian who is well informed, and the number right now that I think the Russian government is embracing is 13,000 Ukrainian killed. And that number, of course, will go up if they continue to press this attack, this offensive. Yeah, to call it a counteroffensive, I mean that's ludicrous. They are attacking a fortified position. This is a classic breaching assault operation, and it's important that people focus on that. People are saying counteroffensive, as if it's some sort of geopolitical event. This is a military operation. In fact, it's the single most difficult military operation one can imagine. You are launching an offensive operation designed to breach a fortified position, a heavily fortified position, one that has been prepared months in advance, fully manned with trained personnel equipped with effective command and control. And most importantly of all, this is a Russian defensive position, which means that it is built in accordance with Russian defensive doctrine, which is the most sound defensive doctrine in the world. This is Russia's strength. And it's not just Russian strength. Understand that the man who designed this, I mean, people talk about Surovikin. He was the man who initiated this. But the design of this goes to Colonel General Alexander Romanchuk. He was the deputy commander of the 58th Combined Arms Army during the initial phases of this conflict, somebody who was heavily involved with the Southern Military District and has intimate knowledge of the theater of operations and the capabilities of the Ukrainian military and the NATO-enhanced Ukrainian military. He was pulled from his position at the 58th Army and sent to the Combined Arms Academy in Moscow sometime last fall, where he conceptualized Russian defensive tactics based upon what he learned about Ukrainian capabilities, about the nature of modern warfare, the lethality of weapon systems, drones, electronic warfare. So basically, he rewrote Russian defensive doctrine, and he published this in an article that was published, I believe, in March of this year. And he lays it out in just blunt detail what the defense looks like. And if you look at what he's talking about, it's exactly what the Russians have laid down along the line of contact between them and the Ukrainians. This is doctrinal defense. And to make matters worse for the Ukrainians, so not only is the Russian defense designed by a guy who rewrote the theory, they then pulled him out of the Combined Arms Academy and put him in command of the Zaporizhia sector. So the guy who reinvented Russian defensive warfare, designed the defenses, is now in command of it. And so it's not just an assault breaching operation against a fortified position. It's an assault breaching operation against the best Russian fortified position in history, bar none. This is the single most difficult assault breaching operation in the history of assault breaching operations. And so now we have to reflect on what was NATO thinking and designing this, because this is not the initiative of the Ukrainian military. This is literally, go ahead.
Just to jump in, Victoria Nuland said that we have been 4 or 3 months in designing, in preparation of this counteroffensive. She said this on television. So
yeah, it's known. I mean, General Miley went to Grafenwohr to observe the 47th Brigade, in fact, the lead brigade in this attack, as it completed its combined arms training at Grafenwohr. And this, again, important terminology we're throwing out there, because people have to understand this isn't just a counteroffensive. If you view it as a counteroffensive, you're missing the point. The point is to carry out an assault breaching operation of this magnitude and complexity, you have to adhere strictly to the doctrine that was created to accomplish this task. And this is NATO doctrine, U.S. military doctrine. They have a mnemonic, and I'll mess it up, but it begins with an S. I think it's SORA or something of this nature. The first S, though, is the most important. It's called suppression. In order to get your assault breaching forces through the initial obstacle belt, minefields, the dragon's teeth, the initial trenches, the screening forces, to make contact with the first line of defense, you need to suppress everything the Russians have that can prevent you from doing this task. If you don't accomplish suppression, none of this will happen. What is suppression? Suppression requires you to eliminate Russian air power from the battlefield. That means that all those Russian aircraft that right now are dropping without hindrance, the 500-kilogram plane guided bombs that are devastating the Ukrainians as they assemble for the attack, those can't be there. You need to suppress them, to remove them. NATO planners know that Ukraine lacks this ability. The helicopters that are devastating the Ukrainian attack, the Ka-52 alligators, and others, they've suffered no losses. They're there operating free of charge, putting precision-guided anti-tank missiles into the Ukrainian vehicles. This is why the Ukrainian casualty count in terms of material loss is so high, because the Russians are operating without intervention. And what would take the helicopters out? An integrated air defense system that should have been layered over the battlefield. There is none, because the Russians, in the lead up to this, have carried out one of the most effective suppression of enemy air defenses campaigns in modern history, virtually eliminating Ukrainian air defense. So that's not there. No suppression of the helicopters. Artillery. You would need to have sufficient artillery strength to suppress Russian artillery, Russian fire support, and the forces on the ground, the anti-tank guided missiles, Russian tanks, etc. You need to suppress that. We know that the Ukrainians lack this. We know going in that they are operating at a 10-to-1 disadvantage on artillery. In a best case scenario where they can bring together all of their artillery capacity, they may get it up to 3-to-10. That's one Ukrainian artillery piece for 3 Russian pieces. I'm a simple Marine, but that math just doesn't work when we're speaking of suppression. Electronic warfare. You need to degrade Russia's command and control. They can't be talking to one another, because this integrated defense that the Russians have is dependent upon units coordinating closely with another, especially in the realm of fire support. So you need to jam the communication so that the Russians are deaf, they're dumb, they're blind, they can't do anything. That's not happening. And we could just go on and on for the things that need to happen, none of which is happening. But worse, NATO knew it wasn't happening. And this is the important part, because NATO trained these units to carry out an assault breach. They trained them, they trained them on the equipment to do this, and they trained them on the tactics to do this. A key aspect of this training preparation is the utilization of a computer simulation known as CORA. It's designed by the German Bundeswehr. NATO uses it extensively in its own exercises. And CORA allows you to do everything I just said, not just design the assault breaching, but you have sub-modules that bring in suppression, artillery, electronic warfare, to exercise all this and bring it together in an extremely realistic simulation of what will happen on the battlefield as you go forward. You can war game this out. Ukrainian forces were plugged into CORA, but they weren't plugged into the sub-modules. They were plugged into a combat module that they have what's something called behavioral adaptions to this combat model. So it's a combat model that pre-programmed Russians surrendering, Russians running away, Russian command and control not working, Russian fire support not working. So they gamed the system. They took the Ukrainians, they put them in the CORA system, plugged in them, and this CORA system was designed for the very place that they're attacking. They use that terrain model. They use the actual computer maps so they are familiar with the terrain. They have the exact laydown of the Russian defenses, and then they game their assault. And they think they can win. There's no way they could win if this was done realistically, which tells me that NATO lied to them. NATO led them to believe that they could do something, because I have to have enough respect for the Ukrainians to believe that they're not suicidal. No Ukrainian commander in his right mind would approach this, look at a simulation where all of his men died in the soft zone before the first line of defense and say, yep, this is the plan we want to do, guys. Let's go. Let's execute this baby. No, what they did is they war gamed something and said, we have a winning model here. We have confidence in what they're doing. And the confidence was generated not by their genuine capabilities, but by the lies told to them by NATO. I'll make another point that's crystal clear here. If any American commander was in charge of this operation, he would be hauled before United States Congress. And the Congress would demand to know why 13,000 Americans died in a futile attack. What the hell is going on here? Now, questions would come up. They would say, hey, we understand that you transitioned these people into a brand new tank that they've never dealt with before sometime in January. And the commander would say, oh, yes, so the brand new Leopard tank. They'd say, how long does it normally take to train a Leopard operator to have basic skills? About 5 months. How much time did you give these guys? 5 weeks. Okay, we have a problem right off the bat, that it's insufficient familiarity with the equipment they're being asked to use in combat. Now, you've exposed them to combined arms doctrine. How long does it take to train a unit to be competent in combined arms doctrine? A year and a half. How long did you give the Ukrainians? 5 weeks. You see where I'm going here? The NATO commanders are criminally negligent. They know that this was going to fail, and yet they allowed it to happen. They deliberately murdered 13,000 Ukrainian soldiers. It's solely on NATO here, solely on NATO, solely on the American, German, French, British advisors who helped plan this attack, helped train these Ukrainian forces, and sent them to something that makes the charge of the Light Brigade look like the most competent military operation in history in comparison to this. This is criminal negligence on the part of NATO. And this is what people need to be reflecting on. It's not a failure of the Ukrainians. They were doomed to fail.
Well, there was a hope from General Petraeus that the defenses would be brittle and there would be no morale. Like, that was the hope that everything was predicated on. And it wasn't.
Find me a general that will survive court-martial by saying, I was hoping the enemy would be this. That's not how it works, General Petraeus. Turn in your stars. Bust down to the rank of private, because that's how a private thinks. I hoped it would work out. I would hope that my $300 a month would help me pay for the $550 Humvee payment that I've just accrued by buying this brand new vehicle. I would hope that's what a private says. That's what junior enlisted say before they're taught the realities of life. General Petraeus should know better. He knows better. But I guess we have to take that back, because this is a man who sat before Congress numerous times while he was in uniform and lied to them about the war in Afghanistan. And he can't say it was a mistake. He knew that every word he said was a lie. He's lied to Congress. He's lying to the American people now. And I hope that the Ukrainian people someday hold him to account. I hope the widows of the 13,000, I hope the daughters who lost their fathers, the sons who lost their fathers, the mothers and fathers who lost their sons, all hold Petraeus to account. I hope one day he visits Ukraine and has to walk before them and apologize to them for what he has said, because it's this kind of rhetoric that has empowered an ignorant American population to be tolerant of these policies. No American in their right mind, even the people who virtue signal by putting Ukrainian flags on their social media and before their houses, no American would say this is a good thing. We're happy this is happening. Let's continue this. Every American, if told that this counteroffensive would bog down before they even hit the first defensive line, 13,000 Ukrainians would be dead, and all the equipment we provided them at tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer expense would be destroyed, would say that's not a good thing. And so therefore they would hold General Petraeus, Colonel Hodges, another former military officer speaking before the American public on media, hold everybody accountable, including Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, General Mark Miley, and everybody else who serves today in the U.S. government in any role, civilian or military or otherwise, who were part of the murder, the slaughter of these Ukrainian soldiers.
Incredibly well said. I have to add that there's only one little silver lining I can see to this story. That's from Telegram channels. There's apparently a mass of people surrendering. So these aren't the Azov people, the nationalists, the earlier fervent Nazis of last year. These are the conscripts they just grabbed from the streets, and they don't want to die for this stupidity. Speaking of Telegram, there's also another video. I have to give it to Mr. Prigozhin of the Wagner Group. You know, he had this negative campaign against Shoigu and Gerasimov. There was a military commander somewhere. He took this little village called 5 Houses or something. And he said, come on, guys, we can take it. Wagner is not there. Meaning implicitly that Wagner is tough. And that was the story that made the regular armed forces of Russia, they're weak. You know, they're weak. We can take them. So that was a very good psychological operation, I think, by Mr. Prigozhin. That's the silver lining. But my question would be, all this for what? For the Vilnius summit to somehow get into NATO? I think George Galloway said that it's like threatening the world with the United States Army. It's like who was that guy? Mussolini threatening Europe with Hitler's army back in the day, and that's practically it. I wonder what your take on this Vilnius thing is for, and how will it go after such stunning losses of weaponry, manpower, everything?
Well, again, I can't believe that any military professional could possibly have believed that this would end any other way than it has ended. So this was designed failure. And I think we have to reflect on that for a second. This isn't an accident. This isn't a mistake. This isn't oops, geez, the Russians were better than we thought they were. We knew the Russians were good. We knew the Russians. Anybody who says we were hoping they were brittle is an idiot, because we knew the Russians were good. We've seen the troops be trained. We've seen them. They've been involved in combat operations on a near regular basis, and they're performing in an outstanding manner. We've seen the equipment pouring off of the production lines. So anybody who thought that the Russians were going to pull a Knights of the Round Table act a la Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail, when the White Rabbit shows up and they run away. No, that wasn't going to happen. The Russians are determined fighters, professional fighters, and can they be beat? Hell yeah, they can be beat. Anybody can be beat on a given day if you apply the appropriate military tactics with the appropriate personnel. You can beat anybody. But the Ukrainians weren't going to beat them. They never were going to beat them. It just wasn't in the cards, and we knew it. So now you have to say why. Let's back up to August of 2021 and the precipitous, embarrassing retreat from Afghanistan that took place, not just for the United States. Understand that NATO had been plugged in there as well. And America abandoned NATO, literally abandoned NATO. We said, we're out, you're on your own. Now, this caused a lot of people in NATO to have two thoughts. The first thought is continued membership in this organization in our best interests? What is the purpose of NATO? Is it continue to be a viable organization? What's its mission? And the second thing is the United States a reliable ally? Can we count on the United States in a crunch? And so rolling out of Afghanistan, the political elite whose very existence in the United States and in Europe depends on the continued existence of NATO, realized that they had to reorient NATO, that NATO had to go back to first principles, which is to be an anti-Russian force. And so we began pushing Ukraine towards a conflict. And we saw we could have avoided this war. We now know. I mean, how many people here knew that the Russians and the Ukrainians were engaged in peace talks right up to the point of the Russian invasion?
He presented the signed agreements. Sorry.
Well, those signed agreements took place. That was after. That was the product of the genuine purpose of the Russian offensive. But see, this makes even more sense. The Ukrainians now, Yermak and others, are admitting that they were sitting down with the Russians, and the Russians were willing to make a lot of compromises to prevent this war. That Ukraine just needed to agree to not be part of NATO. They would work on security guarantees. They would work on the Donbass. Crimea had to be Russian, but this war didn't need to happen. And the Ukrainians laughed afterwards. I've seen a Ukrainian official saying, we led them along the whole time, making them believe that there could be peace, but there wasn't. Now, what they were hoping is that the Russians would hesitate. The whole purpose of the peace agreement leading up was so that Ukraine could launch its attack first. And people forget that this was a preemptive act by Russia. Article 51, the inherent right of self-defense, includes peremptory self-defense when an imminent threat exists, and an imminent threat existed in the Donbass, in the Ukrainian-occupied Donbass, in the form of 60 to 90,000 NATO-trained troops who were being assembled for the purpose of launching an offensive operation to liberate totality of the Donbass. That was the purpose of the Russian intervention, was to preempt that. But it wasn't preemption to destroy Ukraine. It was preemption to get Ukraine back to the negotiating table. And remember, within a week, the Russians had the Ukrainians at the negotiating table. 3 rounds of negotiations in Gomel, Belarus, followed by further discussions in Turkey that culminated in a scheduled 1 April meeting in Istanbul that would have brought about a ceasefire and peace that would have given Ukraine Zaporizhia, Kherson, would have made the Donbass independent, but not part of Russia, that would have required Ukraine to demilitarize to an extent, but not totally, just not be part of NATO. But again, the same security guarantees laid out in 18 annexes to this. And Ukraine had initialed each one, signed each one. This was a done deal. So much of a done deal that Russia lived up preemptively to its obligations by withdrawing from Kiev, withdrawing from Sumy and other areas. This wasn't about the Ukrainians beating the Russians. The only place the Ukrainians beat the Russians is in their quality as liars, as deceivers, as people that can't be trusted. Russia believed there was going to be a peace treaty. Russia withdrew their forces, not because they were beaten, but because they had accomplished their task of bringing the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. This is the reality of this situation. And I don't know what started this rant of mine. Where
it was one.
Well, the lead negotiator for Ukraine, maybe not the lead negotiator, but one of them ended up with a bullet in his head. So there was definitely forces in Ukraine that weren't going to tolerate any kind of peace deal. And then Boris Johnson, of course, also
flew to
put
Kiev.
the kibosh on that.
Yeah, but
just,
Russia's always wanted a negotiated settlement to this problem. And the irony is, the deal that Ukraine is seeking right now is less of a deal than they would have had they agreed to peace to begin with. But 350,000 Ukrainians would be alive today otherwise.
Just a reminder to our viewers, maybe I say this too many times, but this is on top of 9 years of bad faith agreements with the West, which is called the Minsk II agreements,
Yep.
which was about settling a peaceful resolution within Ukraine. And every sponsor, every Western sponsor, from François Hollande to Angela Merkel, said no. It was about getting time to strengthen the army for an attack on Russia. After 9 years of deceit, you go ahead, Scott.
No, now I remember what started this. We were talking about what is NATO going to get out of Vilnius? What do they want from Vilnius?
Yes.
And NATO started this conflict. NATO wanted this conflict, but the purpose was to create the justification for NATO. That's the sole purpose. Now, NATO has a lot of inherent problems. Some would call them fatal flaws. The first fatal flaw is there is no NATO unity. I know that Jan Stoltenberg and Mark Milley and Joe Biden, they talk about unprecedented level. We've never seen NATO this unified in our entire life. I don't know.
I'm speaking to you from Hungary. I can attest to that. There's no unity.
Hungary and Turkey won't let Sweden in. Hungary is their threat. The United States is, this is a tight alliance. The United States is denying Hungary $275 million worth of military assistance, including HIMARS. The European Union, which is an political adjunct of NATO, developed side by side, is sanctioning Hungary. Turkey is at odds with NATO. France won't allow NATO to open a liaison office in Japan. We could just go on and on and on. So the notion of unprecedented NATO unity is fiction. Just not reality. The second is the military viability of NATO. Now let's get beyond the fact that NATO has emptied its arsenals in supplying the Ukrainians and focus on the fact that NATO has zero real military strength today. I mean, look, you're in Hungary and I will put the following challenge down. I challenge Hungary to mobilize 2 divisions capable of sustained offensive operations using standard NATO combined arms doctrine. Can't do it. Can't do it. No NATO army can do it. The Germans can't do it. The French can't do it. The Italians can't do it. Nobody can do it. The United States can do it, but not very well anymore. Because we spent the last 20 years preparing to fight low-intensity, battles against wedding parties in Afghanistan and defenseless villagers in Iraq. We don't know how to fight this war anymore. It's evident every time we send units to the National Training Center. These units are staffed with officers and senior enlisted who cut their teeth on low-intensity conflict. They know nothing about maneuver warfare, and the learning curve to relearn a skill set that we lost, it's done. It's going to take forever, and we can't afford it. We don't have the money to do this anymore. We simply aren't what we used to be, and we're never going to be that again because it's too expensive. Germany has made a lot of noise about expanding its military, spending 100 billion euro to rebuild the German army. Well, then they come out and the price tag, I think, is keep going up. 400 billion. Now it's up to around 600 billion. But it has no money. None. Zero. They can't even provide money to the Ukrainians. The European Union saying, hey, we need a fund to help the Ukrainians. The Germans going, don't look at us. We don't have any money. And it's not just a go ahead.
Until 2027. They
they're going
the German budget until 2027 in this.
Yeah, but that's even then that's just unrealistically optimistic because it doesn't take into account the fact that the German economy is not only in recession but heading toward depression. Even if they had the money now, they couldn't afford anything. They don't have the materials. I think Borrell just came out and said all the stuff we want to buy, we can't do it because the basic materials we don't have and we can't afford it. And that's the reality. Europe can't afford NATO they're talking about. So, postman just showed up at the house. So, that's.
So I want to talk about, this whole war in Ukraine as a big boon for the military-industrial complex. Like they're the ones that are really profiting from all this destroyed, worthless equipment that we're sending to Ukraine and having, Russia destroy for us. Is there some cynical exploitation of the policies being done by people like Petraeus, who are part of the military-industrial complex? I mean, our Secretary of Defense came out of the military-industrial complex. I mean, so there's a lot of, there's got to be some profiteering going on, and that has to be largely responsible for some of these policies.
Yeah, but the profiteering, it's like me running a business and selling drugs out of the back door. Okay, I'm supposed to be in a business of doing X, but I'm making my money by selling drugs. All the profit that's being made right now, if you guys give me a second, I can try and shut this up.
It's okay. I'll jump in for a second there, just based on the military numbers. They're still sending stuff, these Wunderwaffe, even they keep burning. And Real Truth Talk in a comment just recently said, let's send the F-16s, they'll burn beautifully. I agree. And I think Putin said exactly the same thing. They know it's from the 70s and we can shoot it down easily with just the S-300, never mind the 400 and the 500.
If there's a speck of dirt on the runway, they won't even be able to take off.
Yeah, are they going to take off from Germany? Then bye-bye German airfields, or Poland, if they're stupid enough. I just want to say that this week there was a piece of news, I picked it up yesterday, that the big country, the huge power, Latvia, said, we are sending all of our helicopters over to Ukraine, which I checked up, their statement is 5. There's 2 Soviet-era military transport helicopters and 3 Black Hawks, the American types. That's what they sent. How
3
is
Black
that
Hawks
good?
and some transport, yeah.
And 2 MI something Soviet-era transport helicopter. That's what they sent. We sent all of this. The huge power called Latvia. Hello, Maverick. Nice to see you.
Maverick is the culprit. He apologizes. Okay. I just wanted to bring him on so he could say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No apology needed. His family.
So, again, what's happening in terms of making money is there's short-term profits being made. But let's take a look at the long-term problem. As both the United States and Germany or Europe have acknowledged, there's 2 other dogs.
Yeah, a wolf pack. Go, Billy Bob.
He was gonna discuss the long-term profits. There's to me it just seems cynical. Like profit is profit. I'm not sure where he's gonna go with the long-term profits, but there's going to be, these countries in NATO that are joining NATO, and the other countries that are in NATO are increasing their defense budget. So it's going up to like 2% of their GDP. And that's going to be a boon for, all of the Western, probably mostly US, arms manufacturers.
Exactly.
And that's, that's going to be, as long as NATO's around, that huge, need to buy military hardware is going to exist. So it's a short term and it's a long term. But yeah, let's go. Today might be a good time. Now might be a good time for a break while we get our. We're going to take a quick break. Maybe Scott.
No, we're not taking a break. No break today.
Okay,
no break.
Fine.
Okay.
If Scott's back, no break today. Yep.
Well, I apologize again for the dogs. I have people helping me outside. They're painting the house, and the dogs were doing good. And then they decided that they were going to bark. And that's what I get for making assumptions. But what I was saying about defense industry is, let's just make a couple things clear. American defense industry doesn't exist to make America stronger. Please, everybody understand that. They're not patriots. They're not. They don't care about you. They only care about profits. If they cared about you, they'd actually produce equipment that worked. They care about the performance of it. Instead, they promulgate lies. The failure of Patriot in Ukraine. And remember, Vladimir Putin said something very interesting. Everybody right now is talking about, they took out 3 Patriot. Putin said 5. He said, we didn't eliminate 5 by accident. We can eliminate anything we want in Kiev. That's the point. But we knew that the Patriot didn't work. I've known since 1991 that the Patriot is a fundamentally flawed system. And it doesn't matter how many, adaptions they have. Look, if I have a bad heart, I want to play football and I have a bad heart, I can do as many wind sprints as I want. I can lift weights as much as I want. I can do whatever. I got a bad heart. And there's nothing you can do to change that. Patriot is a bad system. It's a bad adaptation of the safeguard system that was developed in the late 1960s, early 70s, based upon automation. The Army fell in love with automation. It's overly complicated, and it just doesn't work at all. But Raytheon continues to sell the lie because it makes them money. They sell it to America. America then puts pressure on Saudi Arabia and other nations to buy the Patriot system, and they're all holding on to a lemon that doesn't work, one that Russia has been working to overcome for years. You know, it's not like Russia woke up yesterday and went, oh my God, the Patriot, how do we overcome that? They've been looking at the Patriot forever. And the F-35 is a piece of garbage. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it, but they still built it. Why would Lockheed Martin allow the F-35 off of their production line when they know it's a piece of crap? Because they don't care about the self-defense of America. They don't care about making us safer. They only care about making money. That's it. So now we have a situation where there are short-term requirements where we need ammunition built or we need other things produced for Ukrainians, because we are out of the drawdown part of our supporting Ukraine. We ain't got nothing left to draw down on, guys. That's how weak we are. So we've done giving away all the stuff we could give away. So everything that left has to be built from scratch. And it's one thing for the president and Congress to allocate money. Now they have to go to these unpatriotic defense vendors who say, gee, nice, but no, because we're not doing short-term contracts. You're asking us to invest billions of dollars in bringing up production lines, and then you're going to give us a small little contract for a short duration, and then we're left with sunk expenses with no follow-on contracts. If you want this line, you have to basically give us a long-term contract, and Congress is going, well, we don't want to give you a long-term contract. We just want a short-term contract to meet this political requirement. And the defense industry is saying pound sand because they don't care about doing what could be perceived as what's right for America. They only care about money, 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 money. And, keep in mind that General Lloyd Austin, as did the revolving door out into Raytheon and back, he now is reaping what he has sown. You see, he was a Raytheon executive, and now he's in a position where he needs Raytheon to do certain things. And Raytheon's saying, that ain't how it works. And you know that ain't how it works because you used to be with us. Your whole job was to make money, fill your pockets, fill your bank account. You didn't join Raytheon because you love your country. You joined Raytheon because you deemed your retirement to be insufficient. This is why you compromised your character and your moral values in the final 10 years of your military career, sucking up to Raytheon at every possible opportunity so that when you retired, you could do that revolving door. General Lloyd, Raytheon, Austin, they're all that way. The entire system is corrupt. So, the concept that defense industry is making money, yeah, I'm not going to deny that they're making money. But I'll tell you what, let's look at Raytheon stock 6 months from now when it becomes crystal clear that the Patriot is the worst missile system in the history of missile systems. Let's look at the other stocks, the people that build HIMARS and other systems, when they realize they don't work. I'd like to see General Dynamics, what it's doing when the F-16 gets shot down every time it takes off or can't even take off because the runway isn't capable. American military equipment sucks. Plain and simple, sucks. I don't want to hear anybody talk about, well, the Abrams will literally burn to death. Not if it has the new armor that we put on it. Yeah, it will, because the Russians have been planning for engaging this new armor for years, and they have built weapon systems that will cut through it like a hot knife through butter. I'm not saying the Russians are perfect, but what I am saying is that for the last 20 years, NATO has telegraphed its punch, being anti-Russian, expanding to the Russian border. And so especially since after 2014, but even after 2008, when the Russian military went into Georgia, they won that war, but they performed poorly. They didn't do a good job at all. And that was a wake-up call for the Russians. They went, this isn't good, because those Georgian light infantry that we were fighting against were better than we were. They were maneuvering properly. Their fire control technique, their command and control, their small unit leadership was all better than the only reason why we won is we came in with more and we rolled over them. We have to become that good. So they began refocusing their structure and their training in 2008. After 2014, especially after 2016, the Russians began to do a more dynamic look at its approach. Remember, in 2016 is when the Russians brought back up the 1st Guards Tank Army and the 20th Combined Arms Army, 2 Cold War offensive-oriented organizations that had been done away with. They brought them back because they said, we have to prepare to fight NATO. That means that everything Russia's been doing since 2016 onwards has been singularly focused on fighting against the NATO threat, unlike the United States and NATO, which has been focused on bombing wedding parties in Afghanistan.
And Sergei Lavrov has recently said as much, saying if Stoltenberg wants a whole NATO fight with Russia, we are ready for it.
We're ready. Russia's been training for this for nearly a decade now. All of their weapon systems are designed to destroy NATO weapon systems. So let's just wake up, America. Russia has an integrated air defense that will shoot down every airplane in the American arsenal. Russia has weapons that will destroy every tank in the American. We don't have super weapons. We have nothing. We literally have nothing. And worse, we don't have an army capable of fighting anymore. Our army cannot fight a multi-division sized operation anymore. We don't know how to do it. We can relearn doing it, but I'm telling you, that takes time, that takes money, that takes effort, and we don't have the budget for it. You know how long it took my artillery battalion to become proficient in maneuver warfare so that we felt competent that if we ever had to go up against a Soviet-style enemy, that we could survive and perhaps prevail? 2.5 years. 2.5 years of nonstop training in the deserts of 29 Palms, California, using live fire. We burned up a lot of ammunition. The ammunition my battalion used in say 1987 exceeds the live ammunition training allotment for the entire Marine Corps today. All right, we just don't shoot anymore. Don't do it. We went out every day and popped off rounds because that's what you have to do to be proficient in combat. Shoot, move, communicate all the time, and with an emphasis on shooting, pounding rounds down range, and then moving. Today, we show up, we line set up. All right, let's practice simulating round fire. Okay, let's fire off a couple rounds. Oh, that's it. We're out of ammo. Let's go back to the rear. It costs money. And in the post-Cold War environment, we've been cutting budgets like you wouldn't believe. And in the war against Afghan wedding parties and helpless Iraqi villagers, we didn't need to prepare massed fires. I'm one of the last generation of American military professionals that have actually done a schedule of fire that is a regimental size or greater. That is, of course, pre-planned fires in support of pre-planned offensive operations. That's what you need, by the way, if you're going to do an assault breaching operation. Be able to do schedule of fires, pre-planned fires, massed fires. And if you don't practice it, you can't do it. And nobody's practicing it today except the Russians.
I just want to say that, anecdotally, it's been recently reported that Stingers coming out of I don't know which military hardware producer were overcharged by a factor of 7 to 1. But I want to say something about Petraeus, from Petraeus all the way down to William Crystal. These people wouldn't be saying this shit if they didn't feel like they could get away with it. And that's the core of it. I mean, look at Iraq too. Look at those people and the lies that were instituted to get into that war, and the lies that have been instituted to get into constituted to get into the Ukrainian conflict. Somebody has to be made to pay before this is going to change. And I'm an old man. I was there for Vietnam. I was there for the assassination of Kennedy. I was there for Iran-Contra. I was there for both Gulf Wars. I want blood. I want those people to pay for what they've done. Alan Dulles is dead. Okay. Reagan is dead. All the people around Reagan, all that scum is dead. Rumsfeld, I'm flying here, so I'm losing names. But I want to see some accountability. If we don't have any accountability, nothing is going to change. I got to tell you, we can talk about public opinion changing and blah, 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 but I'm not sympathetic to the American public. They've been ninnies all my life. Just absolute ninnies. No, nothing fucks. And it's got to change. If that doesn't change, if we don't drag Bill Kristol out of all these CNBC studios by his collar and pummel him in the streets, nothing is going to change. That's all I have to say today.
Well, I'm with you, except that I cannot publicly advocate violence.
Yes, neither do we. But accountability would be nice.
Look,
What other mechanism is there? What other mechanism?
No, Carlo, you're 100% correct. Let me give you an example in history, and I'm not advocating this at all. There were the Young Turks, Enver Pasha, Jamal Pasha, and company during the First World War, who implemented policies against the Armenian population that some people call genocidal. The forcible removal of the Armenians from the Russian frontier and moving them to Syria and such. And afterwards, Armenians said there must be retribution. Somebody has to pay. And they all died. Some of them died violently. Enver Pasha got killed in a firefight that had nothing to do with the Armenians, but everybody else were hunted down by Armenian assassination squads because the Armenians didn't forget. Now, in America, I believe in the rule of law. I believe in the justice system. I don't really. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in the theory of the rule of law, but I understand the American justice system is fundamentally broken and there is no justice. But I would like to believe that we could get our act together. But now let's talk about the Ukrainians. All right? Maybe it's time for the Ukrainians to become like the Armenians and hold to account the people responsible for the slaughter of their men. I'm not advocating violence. I don't support it. But, I'm on a Ukrainian hit list for the crime of talking truth. They want to kill me for talking truth. Dude, your angst and ire is pointed in the wrong direction. I haven't killed a single Ukrainian. Petraeus has. William Crystal has. Victoria Nuland has. They've killed hundreds of thousands of them. If you want to put anybody on a damn list, take my name off it. Put the people who have the blood of Ukrainians on it. Now, I'm not advocating for that, and I would hope that the United States government, of course, would hold anybody accountable who creates such a list and seeks to act on such a list. But we all know that if the U.S. government isn't going to hold them accountable for putting me and Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard and others on this hit list, I doubt that they would ever. Well, actually, they might, because they would be pissed off that their good old boy Petraeus and Hodges and Nuland were on a list, that they were actually, American officials would be held accountable for the crimes that have been committed, not just in their name, but by design, by their design. We are responsible for the murders of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. We, the American people, we, the American government, but more importantly, these individuals that we've highlighted, Petraeus, Nuland, and others, because they knew it. Let's focus. Let's back up for just a second. I wrote critically of Anne Applebaum. She is a noted Russophobe who writes for the New Yorker. Her husband is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense for Poland, and she is an acolyte of a gentleman named George Soros. I'm not going to go too far down the Soros conspiracy theory wagon here. I'm just going to quote George Soros from 1993, where he talks about how important it would be to create a situation to reduce the possibility of NATO body bags. That is, we don't want good people dying. We don't want Americans and good Europeans dying. And the idea would be to create a situation where East European manpower was married up with NATO technology to wage a conflict against Russia. Man, that's exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now. East European manpower is being married up with NATO technology to wage a war against Russia. This is something that George Soros has been theorizing since 1993, and Applebaum has given voice to it. So has everybody else. Ukraine will never be part of NATO, was never going to be part of NATO, was never intended to be part of NATO. What it was intended to do is to suck it into a system where East European manpower could be married up with NATO technology and thrown into a meat grinder against the Russians, not because we care about the Ukrainians. We don't, because we want to hurt the Russians. We don't care that there's 10-to-1 casualty. All we care about is the one. Literally, that's all we care about. Lloyd Austin at least was honest last May when he came, or not last May, but May 2022, when he came out after visiting Kiev in Poland, and he said, our goal is to bring pain to Russia, inflict so much pain that Russia will never again consider carrying out this kind of action. That's what he wanted to do back then. So therefore, all he cares about. Remember, Lindsey Graham said, we'll implement this policy to the last Ukrainian, which tells you we don't care about them. It could be 100 dead Ukrainians. All we care about is that one dead Russian, And who is it that went out just recently and talked about, again, it was Lindsey Graham, the best investment we've ever made given to Ukraine because it results in dead Russians, and dead Russians are good. Guys, this is sick. It's a sickness. It's a mental illness that is pathological in nature. And if the American people don't call it out and hold them to account, then there's no hope for this country because we stand literally for nothing.
And the irony is, this is the irony. Poll after poll after poll show very few of the American people trust the mainstream media. Yet, when you ask them about Ukraine, where they've gotten all their information from the mainstream media,
they say this one's different.
The lies. And so it seems to me, you're right. The government's not going to do anything. The government is corrupt as the day is long. We can talk about the hearings held on the number of Afghani troops that were trained. They're supposed to train an army of 40 to 50,000 people. Then I think it was Austin. I couldn't find it. I tried to find it all week. He was before Congress, and they asked him how many Afghans were trained. He said 4 or 5. I think it was 4 or 5. That was the number who got the appropriate training. Just appalling. Well, there's a level of corruption there, of theft, that's just monumental. And the American people are key, but they've been captured by this Edward Bernays. Goebbels learned from Edward Bernays, and if you can change that, then there will be accountability. If there's going to be violence and it's going to come from the people, then so be it, because the people that they're going to be violent against have done such tremendous violence to the world. Read Bill Blum's books. Forget it.
Exactly.
Good friend of mine. It's there to have accountability. Serious accountability. That has to be, and that's the only thing that will dissuade these motherfuckers from trying to do it as often as they will try to continue to do it.
Scott, what do you think is going to happen in Vilnius? I'm seeing signs of de-escalation, and I'm also seeing signs of escalation.
I wanted to jump in with some news from today, because I know that Scott is a champion. He has stamina for 3-hour live streams with the Duran, but we only have him for 10 more minutes. And today's news was, Scott probably knows this, the 82nd anniversary of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia. It is known as the Day of Remembrance and Sorrow in Russia. And Zelensky went on a little tirade, a short one, a 10-minute one, saying he has evidence that Russians are going to blow the ZMPP, which to me means he wants to blow it. He wants to Chernobyl 2.0. I'm wondering if we can pick your brains on this latest. What else can he do right now? I know his time is limited, basically, I think. But Scott, what do you think?
Well, I think Zelensky is and the Ukrainian government is a desperate man. They're desperate people. We've seen that with their, the greatest act of ecological terrorism in modern history, which of course was the destruction of the dam. Nobody's talking about the consequences of that, what it's done to the Black Sea ecology. Ask people who are in Odessa and all about the quality. They can't swim because of the pollution, but it's what it's doing to the wildlife, and it's going to do this for decades to come. The cleanup is going to be unbelievable if you can ever get the cleanup because of the ongoing conflict. The Zelensky government did this. They blew up the Togliatti ammonia pipeline. Nobody's talking about that. They blew that up as well.
The Germans are talking about that.
Well, of course, because that's their fertilizer. Zelensky is desperate. He has what I would call a scorched earth policy. Basically, the more it becomes apparent that Ukraine is losing this war and can't win, the greater the cost that he's going to impose, not on just Russia, but also on the world. And his one hope is that if he can generate a crisis significant enough with enough global impact that the West will be compelled to take action. That's his only hope of survival, is to do something like that. So the fact, he has been an expert at mirror imaging his intent onto the Russians. He did it with the dam. He did it with the pipeline, and now he's doing it with the nuclear power plant. There's only one country that's shelling the nuclear power plant, and that's Ukraine. Everybody knows it. And so I am concerned about this that he will try. But here's the only thing that gives me hope is that the Russians likewise are aware of this. And so I believe that the Russians will take whatever steps necessary to include the powering down of the remaining reactor, powering it down and having in place the mechanisms capable of, controlling its decommissioning, even under duress, so that we don't get a Chernobyl-like or a 3 Mile Island-like meltdown and all that. The Russians are, again, the only adults in the room when it comes to this. But Zelensky, again, now we'll roll over to Billy Bob's question. Responsible people will speak of de-escalation. There's no one responsible in NATO right now. NATO will double down on stupid, and you're going to hear nothing but escalation, escalation, escalation. The interesting thing, though, is that, again, we had an earlier conversation about the difference between rhetoric and reality. Vilnius will be all about escalation, and then 1 month after Vilnius will be all about de-escalation. Vilnius is a political act, purely a political act, but afterwards reality will kick in. Budgets will kick in, limitations on defense industry, and most importantly, strategic Russian victory will kick in. Because Russia will achieve the strategic defeat of the Ukrainian army by the end of summer, early fall. And that's something that NATO is going to have to live with. They can pretend it's not going to happen, but it's like Baghdad Bob. Baghdad Bob was sitting there saying how great the Iraqi army was doing, and he could sell that lie until the moment that M1 Abrams tanks were driving in the background. And at that point in time, the game was up. And so NATO can sell the lie about whatever they want about Ukraine, but when the Russians achieve the strategic victory, when the Ukrainian army is defeated, the Russians have pushed 150 kilometers past the current borders. When Russia absorbs Odessa, absorbs Kharkov, absorbs Nikolaev, at that point in time, NATO is going to have to wake up to reality that they're going to have to de-escalate and find an off-ramp that brings about some semblance of peace and security.
But they'll still have Madison Avenue behind them. I mean,
have you been on Madison Avenue lately?
That's what Baghdad Bob did not have.
But Madison Avenue has potholes. It has potholes, and the vegetation has worms, and the buildings, the concrete's chipping off, and the roof leaks. Madison Avenue ain't what it was, and that's the problem. That America, we're operating as if we are the powerhouse that we used to be, but we're nothing but a decaying, sick society.
Well, that's true, but I mean, going back to accountability, I think they can swing that. They can twist that up, and we'll be in the same situation with the general populace.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you, but I'm always hopeful that the American people will someday wake up and do the right thing.
I think they'll have to. And by the way, I'd like to mention you're not alone in your forecast. I think the governor of Crimea said the date for a collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces is late August. So from your lips to God's ears, and our thoughts and prayers are with the defenders of the Zaporizhia MPP. And we have 2 minutes for finishing thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, go. Whoever wants to go first.
That's a bold prediction, Scott, about absorbing Odessa by this year. To me, that seems a little bit optimistic. Is that what you're really saying, that by the end of the year we might have Odessa under Russian control? Like, that would be incredible if true. First of all, understand that Russian defensive doctrine incorporates the concept of a major concerted counteroffensive afterwards. If the Ukrainians spend the totality of their military strength and there's nothing left, and you have a collapse of Ukrainian resistance, it's very reasonable to have Russia encircling Odessa, driving to Transnistria, establishing a connection, and then compelling Odessa to capitulate without a fight. Nobody, the mayor of Odessa does not want to see Odessa turned into Bakhmut. The mayor of Kharkov does not want to see that either. And when there's no chance of relief, there's no chance of the Ukrainian army coming to the rescue, no chance of NATO intervening, populations will give up. And remember, these are majority Russian populations, even today.
So when you are confronted with the inevitability of a Russian strategic victory, I see Odessa folding like a house of cards, Kharkov folding like a house of cards, and I see Russia getting what it wants. The prerequisite is the total defeat of the Ukrainian army, and I think Russia's well on the way to doing that.
From your lips to God's ears, Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Scott.
And we hope to have you back. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It's been a great discussion. Thanks, Scott.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. Have a wonderful day.
And sorry about the dogs again. I apologize for that.
No problem.
Okay.